In 2019, the Pokémon trading card game spiraled into its modern dark ages, fueled by the release of the Tag Team GX Pokémon. 2020 saw the game experience arguably its worst year of the game, with new V and VMAX Pokémon creating an unplayable meta. 2021, however, were the first few steps to fix the Pokémon TCG, with a much better year overall. By the end of the year, the incredibly dominant Fusion Strike Mew VMAX deck was in everyone's crosshairs, but could 2022's Brilliant Stars change the tides of the game? Brilliant Stars was the first set of 2022, which began the year off with a bang, debuting a new V-Star mechanic. V-Star Pokémon were two prize evolution Pokémon that evolved from regular Pokémon V. They also came with a unique once per game V-Star power, a powerful effect that could be used once per game. Unlike the previous once per game GX attack mechanic, V-Star powers could be abilities or attacks, and as we'll come to see, almost all of the best V-Star powers were abilities. The biggest story out of this set was undoubtedly Arceus V-Star. Arceus V-Star revolved around using its Starbirth V-Star power ability to find any two cards from the deck once per game. This helped it set up its board so that it could use its powerful Trinity Nova attack, a powerful attack that did 200 damage and accelerated 3 basic energy from the deck to your Pokémon V. Once your Arceus V-Star set up, it helped to keep attaching energy to other attackers for the rest of the game, making it one of the most efficient Pokémon around. But Arceus' Trinity Nova attack looks quite hard to power up on its own, doesn't it? That's why they also printed Double Turbo Energy, a special energy card that counts as 2 colorless energy, but reduces the damage done by the Pokemon it's attached to by 20. The damage reduction downside is well worth the benefit of having an energy card that is worth 2 energy at once, which got your Arceus V-Star attacking as soon as the second turn of the game. Many Arceus decks chose to take advantage of the always popular Drizzile Inteleon engine, which could help you find trainers from the deck when you evolved into Drizzile or Inteleon. This helped them find cards to get Arceus V-Star on the board reliably and early. Other Arceus V-Star decks use the new Bibarel as their consistency engine, relying on its Industrious Incisor's ability to draw cards until they had 5 cards in hand. These Arceus decks loved the low investment, high value that Bibarel brought. Bibarel would also go on to fit in all kinds of other decks for the entire time it was legal. It was definitely one of the other most impactful cards from Brilliant Stars. Arceus V-Star was by far the most versatile and widely played new attacker from the set, so much so that this video might be an hour long if I just spent its time covering its many partners from just this format alone. The most popular partner there was a generic Inteleon build called Arc Intel that used the consistency of the Inteleon engine to outlast other Arceus decks. Many other Arceus decks chose to play dark, psychic, or fighting type attackers, trying to take advantage of popular weaknesses of meta decks like Mew VMAX, other Arceus V-Star decks, and Urshifu VMAX. Others used attacks aimed at one-hit killing the opponent at all costs. No matter what kind of arc you were playing, it was the Arc of Arceus during Brilliant Stars. If you've been enjoying this video, please do be sure to leave a like on it to help me support and grow the channel. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more retro Pokemon content as well. Thank you all so much, sorry for interrupting, and back to the content. The other most immediately impactful new deck from Brilliant Stars was Whimsicott V-Star, a flash-in-the-pan disruptive little fiend deck that I can't help but love. Whimsicott V-Star used its Trick Wind attack to do solid damage while locking the opponent out of special energy and tool cards during their next turn. This paired well with other disruptive cards like Crushing Hammer to remove additional energy and Path to the Peak to slow the opponent down, making for a supremely annoying deck to face. While it was never at the top of the meta, it was a regular sight during this event in top 8s as a strong anti-meta pick. What was that meta? Well, besides Arceus and Mew VMAX everywhere, many of Mew's counter decks were still popping up, now adding cards to deal with Arceus. But the main story of this set was undoubtedly Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX, which had a resurgence as a powerful Tier 1 deck, since it hit both Fighting and Darkness weakness really efficiently when paired with Galarian Moltres. The Brilliant Stars meta was the calm before the storm though. That storm being Astral Radiance. Astral Radiance surprisingly introduced another new mechanic to the game, this time being the Radiant Pokémon, and it definitely didn't pull any punches. Radiant Pokemon were one per deck, powerful basic Pokemon that had incredible effects. Don't worry about Hawlucha or Heatran though, we're not here for them. We are here for Radiant Greninja, one of the strongest Pokemon cards ever printed. Radiant Greninja has the Conceal the Cards ability that once during your turn allows you to discard an energy from the hand and draw 2 cards. This gives decks a solid backbone consistency to fall on, letting them consistently find cards throughout the game. It also discards energy for Pokemon that want them in the discard pile. Greninja also had the Moonlight Shuriken attack, which did 90 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon at the cost of Greninja discarding 2 energy. This attack could be used to set up multiple knockouts or to KO multiple Pokemon at once, especially little guys like Sobbles and Drizzles. What makes Greninja so incredible is that it acted as the de facto Radiant if decks didn't have a better option. It provided consistency that none of the other Radiants could hope to match, and it had an attack that often ended the game if it went off soon enough. Whether Greninja was abusing Scoop Up Net to reuse its ability multiple times or barraging the opponent's board with a ridiculous amount of damage, he was here and he wasn't going anywhere. Why was Greninja so good though? Sure, Suicune v Ludicolo seems like a really good deck to put it in with its water energy, but how are we actually going to power up Moonlight Shuriken? Oh, well I just got this note and it says, we decided to give Suicune V 70 more HP and make it do 40 more damage. This is stupid. Who would give a card that's already a solid meta deck these kind of buffs? It says, signed the design team. Palkia V-Star is the physical embodiment of power creep during the Sword and Shield era. With massive stats fitting a V-Star Pokemon, it threatens to one-hit KO anything with its super strong Subspace Swell attack, which swings for 60 damage plus 20 more for each benched Pokemon in play, reaching up to 260 maximum damage. Even if it's only doing 220 damage, this attack cleans up weaker Pokemon and can be easily boosted to take out larger targets effortlessly. It also has the incredible V-Star Power Star Portal, which attaches 3 water energy from the discard pile to your Pokemon. This powered up its own Subspace Swell attack, as well as allowing Radiant Greninja to easily launch a Moonlight Shuriken attack at any moment. Any other water attacker you could think of, yeah, they worked fine too. Palkia V-Star was the meta when it released, taking the entire top 8 of the first tournament it was released for, Melbourne Regionals 2022, the first time this has ever happened in the modern era of Pokemon. Some Palkia decks use the ever-reliable Drizzile Inteleon engine that we've talked about previously, while others abuse this Mew from Celebrations, which could find item cards from your deck, allowing the deck to play at a quicker pace by spamming item cards. The meta was quickly centralized around Palkia V-Star and the previously released Arceus V-Star and Mew V-Max, which left room for some creative decks to rise from the ashes, the most famous of which being Sander Wojcik's Mewtwo V-Union Control deck, which is one of the few successful decks using the V-Union mechanic, as well as using Astral Radiance's new Miltank, which walls out big Vs like Palkia. This deck played around the format's inability to one-hit KO Mewtwo by endlessly healing, or it could spread 16 damage counters if the opponent ever missed an attack. Also, there was this big basic Regigigas deck. This deck really seemed like a meme, but in actuality it wasn't too bad. If you had all 6 Regi Pokemon in play, Regigigas could use his ability, Ancient Wisdom, to accelerate 3 energy from the discard pile to one of your Pokemon, letting you attack with powerful basic Regi Pokemon to attack common weaknesses, like Lightning to beat Palkia, and fighting for Arceus. With the release of Pokémon Go, the World Championships were on the horizon. However, the only standout new deck from Pokémon Go was Radiant Charizard Inteleon, a deck that best utilizes the new Radiant Charizard as a great attacker. Similar to the old Inteleon toolboxes, this deck set up the right boards to take big knockouts, now with Radiant Charizard, who was a brutal attacker that made its attacks cost less for each prize card the opponent had taken, allowing its powerful Combustion Blast to be powered up much more easily in the late game. This strategy with Radiant Charizard was enough for Ross Cawthon to make it to top 16 at Worlds, innovating on a deck that is arguably the best deck around in this metagame. The real story from Worlds, though, was the pop-off of an Arceus V-Star deck that paired Arceus with Flying Pikachu V-Max and Hisuian Decidueye V-Star. While obvious in hindsight, a deck that allowed Arceus to hit both of the most relevant weaknesses around took over Worlds, taking all top 3 spots in Masters over a swarm of Palkia, Mew, and other Arceus decks. Special shout out to Flying Pikachu, which not only hit Lightning weakness, but also walled out completely basic decks, like Regigigas. Following this year's Worlds, we saw the release of Lost Origin, a set that marked the return of the Lost Zone, an area of the game where cards are put and can never be returned. The Lost Zone engine at this time was much stronger and more unique than the previous iterations. It was all based around building up the amount of cards in your Lost Zone to receive unique benefits. The best way to build it up was the supporter card Colress's Experiment, which looks at the top 5 cards of your deck, keeping 3 of them, and the 2 other ones get tossed into the Lost Zone, never to be seen again. The other best way to build it up the Lost Zone was to use Comfey, which can use its flower selecting ability if it's your active Pokemon, to look at the top 2 cards of your deck and allow you to keep one of them while the other gets tossed into the Lost Zone. By using switching cards or scoop up nets, it was possible to use multiple Comfey abilities per turn, setting up a quick and powerful strategy. When you got 4 cards into the Lost Zone, you could then unlock Cramorant's Spit Innocently attack for 0 energy. Spit Innocently did a solid 110 damage, helping to set up damage in the early game to use for KOs later on. When you got to 7 cards in the Lost Zone, you unlocked the Mirage Gate item card, a key card in most Lost Zone decks. This card attaches 2 energy of different types from the deck to your Pokemon however you like. This helps the Lost Zone decks power up dangerous attackers very quickly. The deck really gets scary when it reaches 10 cards in the Lost Zone though, which unlocks Sableye, which can use its Lost Mind attack to spread 12 damage counters on the opponent's board however you like. This attack could easily set up to take multiple knockouts at once, and it tore apart Evolution decks. The other attacker unlocked at 10 cards in the Lost Zone is Giratina V-Star, which can use its Star Abyss V-Star power to instantly KO your opponent's active Pokemon. It also had the Lost Impact attack, which is another good option, outputting a huge amount of damage at the cost of putting 2 energy from your board into the Lost Zone. These new Lost Zone decks were quite solid. Lost Zone Tina was a nice generic version that played all of the cards we've covered so far. This deck also occasionally got to use Radiant Greninja to attack if it chose to play the water energy to use it. Another Lost Zone deck was Lost Zone Radiant Charizard. Turns out that Sableye and Charizard paired together really helped to set up knockouts on bigger multi-prize Pokemon, and the Mirage Gate item card allowed Charizard to be powered up even sooner than usual. Lastly was Lost Zone Goodra, which powered up the Goodra V-Star, an intimidating and tanky threat, which used its Rolling Iron attack to do 200 damage and take 80 less damage from attacks during the next turn. The name of the game for this deck is surviving multiple attacks while wearing down the opponent, and using its Moisture Star V-Star power to fully heal Goodra when it was damaged. Possibly even better at using the new Lost Zone Pokemon than the Lost Zone engine itself was Arceus, of course, which could pair really well with Giratina V-Star for a bulky and disruptive deck that, as a bonus, could Lost Zone double Turbo Energy to pay for Giratina's Lost Impact. Goodra V-Star also paired well with Arceus, which easily helped set up Goodra at the cost of usually needing to spend your V-Star power on Arceus. The new Kyurem VMAX also gave Palkia V-Star a new partner, since it could discard energy from itself to do massive damage, even more than the previously used Ice Rider Calyrex, which was another Palkia partner. Lastly, Lost Origin debuted Drapion V, a card that completely countered Mew VMAX. Since it attacked for less energy for each battle-style Pokemon your opponent had in play, the Fusion Strike deck, which always had a full board of Fusion Pokemon, would allow Drapion to attack for free and want to KO anything in its arsenal. Surely this near auto counter to Mew VMAX would finally stop the deck from its dominance. And no, Mew VMAX just started turning off all the abilities with the Pact of the Peak Stadium, so Drapion just didn't always win anyway. Everything would be changed once again, however, with the release of Silver Tempest. This unassuming set, with seemingly underwhelming cards, would forever change the Pokémon TCG, with some of the most ridiculous cards ever put to paper. While many of the cards from Silver Tempest, like Regidrago V-Star, would go on to see success later, excluding the expanded format, it was no mistake who was king in this new metagame: Lugia V-Star. Lugia V-Star relied on the Summoning Star V-Star power, which put up to 2 colorless Pokemon from the discard pile onto the bench. What were we putting in play? Well, Archeops, which had the incredible ability Primal Turbo, which attached 2 special energy from the deck to one of your Pokemon. With 2 Archeops in play, this meant 4 energy from the deck every single turn, which powered up almost any attacker imaginable. One of the best special energy here was Powerful Colorless Energy, which boosts the damage of colorless Pokemon's attacks by 20, such as Lugia, and it also boosted the damage of the previously unplayable Stoutland V, which could use its Double Dip Fangs to do 40 damage, but if the attack took a KO on a basic Pokemon, you'd get to take an extra prize card, meaning that Lugia could quickly overwhelm evolving decks or little basics like Comfey from the Lost Zone decks by doing 80 to 100 damage with Stoutland. The other best special energy in Lugia was easily Aurora Energy, a special energy that provided all types of energy, Now this deck could power up any attacker imaginable, including the amazing rare Pokemon, which were previously considered nearly unusable due to their frankly silly attack costs. Yveltal Amazing Rare could use Amazing Destruction to instantly KO the opponent's active, meaning that almost nothing was safe, while Raikou Amazing Rare did 120 damage to the active and hit a bench target for 120 damage as well, taking out multiple Pokemon at once and hitting the opposing Lugia decks for weakness. Lastly, the deck capped out its two attackers with some unexpected choices. Radiant Charizard could use Aurora or Heat Fire energy to attack easily in the late game, while Lumineon V formed both a consistency backbone with its Luminous Sign ability to help the deck set up, and it could also use its previously ignored Aqua Return attack to get itself out of play when you did use it. Lugia V-Star in this format is arguably the most dominant deck in Pokemon's history. Even Palkia's dominance looked tame as Lugia V-Star stacked up results of nearly every event for the next 6 months. What made Lugia V-Star so frustrating is that it was hard to stop. If it got its V-Star power summoning star off on the second turn, it was nearly impossible to stop from there, as it would easily just piece together a double KO or an extra prize card from every turn there forward. The best way of beating Lugia V-Star was Disruption, but it wasn't always a reliable way, as many Lugia decks used Oranguru to stack the top of their deck, making them immune to Marnie's Hand Disruption, a common supporter at the time. Instead, many decks went back to playing the good old-fashioned Judge, which shoveled their hand into their deck, getting around Oranguru, and also put a Path to the Peak in play. From that moment forward, it was time to pray and hope the opponent never got to use the Summoning Star. Many counter-strategies to Lugia popped up in this format. If your deck didn't have a way to beat Lugia, it wasn't really a deck at all. But it's worth keeping in mind that many of these decks were one Lugia attack, such as like a switch, or one lucky Lugia draw away, such as a Stadium Bump, from losing the game anyway. Lost Zone was the other most popular deck in this Lugia meta, since, as it turns out, Lost Zone could also power up the broken Amazing Rare Pokemon using their Mirage Gates. Attackers like Raikou Amazing Rare and Rayquaza Amazing Rare could tear apart the opponent's board. Lost Zone decks also liked using the Kyogre from Celebrations to knock out multiple benched Pokemon at once to win the game in one fell swoop. Regigigas remained popular for its ability to use the Regieleki and hit Lightning Weakness, one-hit KOing an unprepared Lugia, while locking down their board with, of course, Path to the Peak. Vikavolt popped back up on the map after a long hiatus, since its ability to hit Lightning Weakness while locking down Lugia V-Star was greatly appreciated in helping to set up other attackers that could finish the game. Mew VMAX, well, of course Mew VMAX continued to succeed, it always does, relying on Path to the Peak and Judge to be the best way to stop Lugia from ever announcing its V-Star power. Some other unique decks like Eternatus VMAX of all things returned to the meta, brandishing its own form of ability lock with the Galarian Weezing, before announcing consecutive dread end attacks that the opponent could not respond to. Shout out to the mandatory Big Parasol in many bigger decks at the time to ensure you didn't instantly lose when a Yveltal Amazing Rare hit the board. Other wall decks like Arceus Duraludon VMAX and Goodra V-Star also utilized this tool card to see some decent success. Lastly, I think it's worth highlighting Control, which succeeded in this metagame due to its ability to remove special energy with the Yveltal from Celebrations. With just a few attacks, decks like Mew VMAX and Lugia V-Star would run out of energy to attack, while the Tech Ice Cube would completely wall out basic decks like Lost Zone and Regigigas if you could get its attack off. And that's all for 2022. What started as an incredibly centralized but relatively fair meta with brilliant stars quickly dove into one of the most calamitous years in the history of the Pokemon trading card game, with two of the most dominant showings of new decks ever. With 2023, Scarlet and Violet loomed on the horizon. The return of the classic EX Pokemon teased powerful new decks that would dominate the game for years to come, alongside and beyond their powerful V-Star counterparts. As Sword and Shield disappeared, we look forward to 2023. Stay tuned to the Whimsicast, as next time in the finale of this series, we'll explore Pokemon's modern Golden Age.